In 2022, Sony AI made headlines with the announcement of GT Sophy, a deep learning-powered AI racer built specifically for the Gran Turismo franchise that had proven itself in closed race conditions against professional players. It's an interesting example of the surge of deep learning research of trying to train AI systems to play commercial games, much like the work in StarCraft 2 that preceded it. However, despite all the media hype, Sophy wasn't included in Gran Turismo 7 when it launched on PlayStation 5, but since then, Sony AI and the Gran Turismo developers Polyphony Digital have declared that they wanted Sophy to become a part of the Gran Turismo franchise and make it a fully fleshed out opponent for players. I'm Tommy Thompson, welcome to AI in Games Plus, and after releasing a video on my main channel in 2022 that explained how Sophy was developed, I'm returning to Gran Turismo 7 to try my hand at racing against it. Recently, Polyphony released a patch for Gran Turismo 7 that adds several different versions of GT Sophy to race against in a limited time event. So for this video, I'm going to jump into the game, try my hand at a few races, and then discuss my experiences as well as a more broader analysis of this recent development. But of course, the big problem here is I'm not very good at Gran Turismo or simulation-heavy racing games in general. In fact, if you watched my original video, there isn't an awful lot of footage of me actually racing. Instead, I used replays of Sophy and some of the research data as well. So yeah, I'm now going to expose myself as a terrible Gran Turismo 7 player, all with the big question hanging over me of whether I can actually beat Sophy. Alright, enough babbling, let's get into it! Hey everyone, welcome in joining me here over in Gran Turismo 7. So like we say at the start of the video, there is a new update. It's a limited time event that's been added to Gran Turismo 7. I'm recording this in early March. I believe that Polyphony Digital has stated that this additional component of the game is only going to be around until the end of March, roughly. We'll see how that turns out. So yeah, if you actually go into the main menu of Gran Turismo 7, you'll see up in the top right corner, there is the Race Together event, which is now available. Critically, I was going to say, if you're someone who is new to Gran Turismo 7 and you want to try this out yourself, two things: you need a collector's level of 6 in order to enter any of the Race Together events, and critically that will also probably mean your national level B license as well. And funnily enough, as I was getting ready to participate in these races, I realised I didn't have that set up yet. I hadn't played enough Gran Turismo 7 to get there. It takes a few hours to get to this point, but once you're in there, you're good to go. So if we just pop in, and we'll see now it offers us these 4 races that we can conduct on 4 different tracks. The Tsukuba circuit, Alsace village, the Trial Mountain circuit, and Suzuka circuit. And also critically, if we go down here into the bottom, it explains to us that in this limited time tech demo event, you will be racing against Gran Turismo Sophy, an AI agent developed by Sony AI in collaboration with Polyphony Digital and Sony Interactive Entertainment. For this event, you will be racing against 4 different GT Sophy drivers, each driving cars with a lower performance rating than that of your own. And I'm currently only driving something with a performance rating of around 500. You will have the option to choose from 3 difficulty settings ranging from beginner to expert. Furthermore, you'll be able to go head-to-head with an equally matched superhuman GT Sophy. Enjoy the thrill of taking on a lifelike AI driver that is sure to challenge you like never before. Select the button at the lower left to learn more about the technology behind Gran Turismo Sophy, and if you click on this link at the bottom corner, it just opens up the web page over that Sony AI has hosted all about Gran Turismo Sophy. So what we're going to do for this video is I am going to actually take a chance and race against Sophy in different conditions. Critically, I would say it's worth noting, I will probably be trying to do this in ever increasing difficulty to see how well I get on. Now, you can see here that actually when we select the difficulty, it also dictates the prize that we get in terms of cash, credits for the game that we can then use, but also critically, what is the car that is going to be used for that race. And well, I'm interested to see how this turns out, because I'm not the best Gran Turismo player. As you'll know, I have a very low collector level. I'm not particularly great at this game. I don't play it a huge amount, so I'm just interested to see how well that I stack up against it. So with that, we're going to jump into the races. I will show you a little bit of my time at beginner and intermediate, and then up to expert level on different tracks, and I'm going to do this largely without commentary, just let you play through it and see it as it happens. Alright, enjoy. Here we go. So just getting ready now to do my first race. This is us on the Tsukuba circuit. This is on easy difficulty, and you'll notice in the starting grid, I am up against 4 different Sophy drivers. They are referred to as, if I can find them again, blue, rouge, vert, and violet. In French, of course. And yeah, I'm going to shut up now. I'm going to start the race. And we're going to see how well I get on. Oh boy. Well, there we go. That first one wasn't too difficult. Ultimately managed to kind of take the lead in the middle of the second lap, and they didn't really catch up. Though, nonetheless, I thought they were actually pretty interesting to race against. I think what we'll do is we're going to start mounting up the difficulty. Also, I'm going to have to try and race better because, as you might have noticed, I was a little bit rocky. I'm not a particularly big fan of that track. I'm not very good at it. So I think we'll up the difficulty a little bit, and then we're going to try it again and see how well I stack up, because this is us on the beginner difficulty. This is us at the lowest level. But generally, those bots were pretty exciting to play against. I quite enjoyed it. Okay, here we go. I've cranked up the difficulty. We're now on intermediate. I think this might be a bit of a challenge for me. But we've moved the action over to the Alsace village track. And so, well, I guess without further ado, let's get straight into it and see how well I perform. Yeah. Well, that was absolutely vicious. Really tough race. I'm actually grateful that I managed to not be last at this point. They really seemed to break away in the back half there, but also just very interesting, like, actual conflict between myself and particularly Rouge and Vert in the back three there. Very competitive for a bit, and then ultimately, once Rouge got a decent enough lead on me, that was it. There was no way I could come back from that at all. Yeah, I'm struggling a little bit with that track again. Like, fun enough, I think it's also the cars, and also I've been playing around a little bit with my assist settings. My ABS was a little bit too strong. Then again, I'm blaming my tools right here. I'm blaming my tools when really I've just been outclassed already. Very interesting, very different, actually, very different experience from playing it at beginner. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play at least one more race on intermediate. We'll try and maybe do it on another track. Then we're going to try on expert, and we're going to see just ultimately how far behind I am at the end of it compared to the rest of them. Alright, so I figured what might be a good shout is, given that in each race that we're dealing with, the configuration of Sophy, or the behaviour of Sophy, is meant to be different, let's go back to Tsukuba and try and run it on intermediate. Given I got destroyed over on the other track, maybe we'll perform a little bit better this time around.
Yes, I did it. I actually won. Oh, that was vicious. Absolutely vicious. I really enjoyed that. Yeah, as you just saw there, like, so much more intense. Interestingly, I think this particular racer sticks to the line a lot more and doesn't aggressively swerve as much or turn, but there was some outright collisions there. It got pretty intense, it got pretty crazy, like, wow. I really enjoyed that. That was good fun. Not just because I won, but I just thought the intensity of the race itself was actually, you know, quite exciting. Okay, for my last race that I'm going to do for this video, we're over now on the Trial Mountain circuit, which is race 3. Now, I'm assuming that even though I'm playing it on beginner, I'm going to assume that it's actually a more challenging, you know, once again, we saw this when I moved over to race 2, that Sophy, this was a different version of Sophy that also seemed more intelligent, or at least different from the other one. I'm going to assume the same thing here. Critically also, given I observed that the credits rewarded for even winning on beginner is more than it is to attain it on the intermediate difficulty on race 1. So I'm assuming I've got a tough race on my hands. Let's go. Got a bit of an unfair advantage here. I think my car is much better on the straights, and that means I'm getting to run away from them. Ooh. Oh god, what did I do? I completely flubbed it on like that last bend. That last big bend. I completely lost control of the vehicle. I don't know, I wasn't... I'm so annoyed at myself. But that was a great race. I really enjoyed that. I had a lot of fun. Sure, my car's a little bit more powerful than theirs, but certainly, like, woofed. That was wild. I feel like, actually, I was quite pleased with how I was performing until, like, the last 5 seconds. Oh, God. Oh, no. Okay, here we go. Just for giggles. Race 4 on Expert. I think I'm gonna just record the first lap for this, because, yeah, this isn't gonna go well. Yeah, let's stop there, shall we?
Well, it's clear I'm not very good at Gran Turismo, isn't it? But that's not the focus of the video. What is interesting is what we saw from the different versions of Sophy. We're seeing varying degrees of skill being exerted by these AI agents, combined with a variety in the types of strategy being employed as well. I can certainly say that, despite getting my ass handed to me on multiple occasions, that I thoroughly enjoyed my time playing in this GT Sophy playtest. But let's dig into the details. What were the highlights for me, and what does it all mean in the context of Sony AI's research on the project? Now, it's worth saying at this point that, given that Sony AI hasn't detailed anything about this playtest as of yet, this is purely speculation on my part, though I'd argue it's certainly some rather educated speculation. I do know a thing or two about AI for video games, after all. So first of all, as they described when you join the playtest, there are multiple versions of GT Sophy you can play off against, and that's highly evident when you stack up against them on the track. The skill level of the racers varies, the way in which they take corners varies, or handling the gas and acceleration. Plus, how they attempt to pass you can vary from the more passive and distant to aggressive and up close. This tells me one thing straight away, in that they have been iterating on and running multiple training phases to create each of these Sophy racers. As detailed recently in my AI 101 episode on the foundations of machine learning, it's not really plausible to crack open the brain of a trained ML agent and modify its behaviour. You have to train it to behave in a manner that you expect. In this instance, as detailed in episode 68 of AI in Games, Sophy runs a deep neural network that is trained using reinforcement learning. It's not particularly easy to just rip open a neural network and make changes to it to fit a specific playstyle or strategy. So odds are the Sophys that you see here are the end result of several training experiments under different configurations designed to achieve different results. The reinforcement learning problem will have been configured such that it aims to achieve a specific skill rating, as well as unique aspects of its racing style. Digging a little more into the actual playstyles, what strikes me as interesting is how different each of these specific racers are. We noted in several races that specific versions of Sophy would be more aggressive than others, more prone to actually bumping into me, even nudging me where it could in specific situations. Sophy Violet is a rather aggressive race driver, and it doesn't strike me as a coincidence that it was positioned at the back of the pack, given it means as players we come across that interaction pretty quickly. Compare that to Sophy Vert, who seemed much more chill by comparison. Now, these are interesting because these personalities will no doubt arise courtesy of how Sophy is trained. This isn't an unexpected outcome of developing this AI. Referring back once again to the GT Sophy episode on AI in Games, the racer is trained by factoring in specific aspects of gameplay style, be it how it handles the car, takes turns around other racers, or how close it even gets to other racers when attempting to pass. I discussed in that video how one of the big challenges Sony AI had to deal with was that Sophy is often quite aggressive, and so they continually had to adjust the reward functions to actively discourage getting too close to other drivers. For this experiment, I suspect that they've adjusted the reward functions to allow them to have more variety in how aggressive or passive they are in a myriad of circumstances. These are often subtle adjustments to the learning parameters, but it results in some very tangible differences in the racer's behaviour. Oh, and speaking of personalities, it was interesting to observe the emojis that are applied to each racer as you interact with them. These look like they're reacting to your behaviour, with the Sophy racers upset if you get too close or overtake them, or they look quite happy when they take the lead. This appears to be based on specific combinations of input parameters to the neural network. They could have trained an additional system to successfully communicate via these emojis that the system recognises specific input patterns that reflect specific gameplay segments, or they equally could have just rigged something together using more simplistic means. But either way, it adds a little bit of personality to each of the racers and helps communicate to the player that they are reacting to your own actions, which is kinda neat. And with all that out the way, for me, one of the most exciting elements of all of this is it's clear there is a huge disparity in the skill level of the drivers. The beginner racers are competent and functional, meanwhile the expert racers are going to put the very best Gran Turismo racers through their paces. The fact that this exists is actually kind of a big deal. Why? Well, let me explain. One of the problems with adapting machine learning to games for NPCs and opponent players is how to accommodate varying skill levels. GT Sophy, as was described in my explainer video, is built to be the best Gran Turismo racer possible. When these systems are trained, it's told what the objective is, and for Sophy it was to be a highly competent racer that also typically evokes some aspects of racer etiquette. The end result is, without question, very impressive. But the system can only perform at the level it's been trained on. It can't drop its skill down in order to accommodate the player. Think of it like when you're playing the likes of a racing or fighting game against someone who's perhaps younger than you or isn't as experienced. You might hold back a little, not play at your full potential, and deliberately make mistakes so as to help them enjoy the experience or even learn how to get better. That's a very natural thing to do as humans, except when you're playing Mario Kart 8. But this isn't a skill that a machine learning trained AI can replicate. They can only perform at the level that they have been tasked with attaining. Addressing the skill level issue is going to be a big turning point for how machine learning trained AI is going to be used in games going forward. Similar Grandmaster experiments, such as the OpenAI 5 or Google DeepMind's StarCraft player AlphaStar, are functionally useless in typical video game development because they only cater to the top 1% of players and can't adjust their behaviour. Being able to have different versions of the same bot running at different skill levels solves that problem, and more recently the likes of Halo Infinite's multiplayer is one of the breakthrough examples of this in practice. That's what makes these varying difficulties a big deal. They've clearly ran the training process to create versions of GT Sophy with different skill ratings. Now, I'll refrain from speculating on how they did it, given there's a myriad of approaches they could take, but I'll be interested to hear how exactly it was done. Given the naive approach, which is to simply run a new training process every time they want a new version of Sophy, would be time-consuming and expensive to run, especially when you think about how each race was a possibly different core version of Sophy, containing 4 variants of that core version across 3 difficulties. In the worst-case scenario, if you assume that each of the 4 races needs 4 racers across 3 difficulties, and possibly customised to run specifically on each track, they would have ran the training process over 140 times, based on my back-of-the-napkin arithmetic, though I suspect they came up with a much smarter approach. Regardless, this feels like a turning point for me in terms of the applicability of this technology, given the end result is all the more interesting. These racers are not only rather competitive, but they're fun to play against, and it's clear that there is a skill gap between each of the supposed difficulty levels. A point that was mentioned by one of the pro players that I discussed in my original video is how often you see the higher level bots take the corners in slightly different ways from how you might expect. This is something I observed, and quite often I was learning from them and trying to take corners differently. I mean, clearly I still have a lot to learn about Gran Turismo in general, but even mid-race I was finding I wanted to follow their path along the track, given they often seem to know something I don't. Of course, the hard part was whether I could actually do it. So there we have it. I think it was a mixed success, and given I'm not particularly good at Gran Turismo anyway, I'm not surprised that I got trounced by different versions of Sophy. But let's take the victories where we find them. I could at least beat the easiest version of the bot, though in saying that it was still a bit of a challenge at times. I'm keen to see what updates come in the future, and in between I'll need to spend some time practicing how to actually play Gran Turismo 7. But hey, in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I hope you've found this video interesting. I'm keen to hear from anyone out there who's also tried their hand against Sophy, especially if you're actually good at the game, and let us know what you thought of it. Contrary to my repeated defeats, I actually enjoyed the experience overall. AI in Games Plus is of course my second channel for doing dumb stuff alongside AI in Games, the home of all things AI for video games. Support my work on Patreon to see even more serious analysis alongside some less so serious musings. Check out the links on screen and in the description, and I'll catch you all in the next video.